Hello and welcome back to Voyage of a Time Wanderer. Today I'm very excited to be sharing a vintage, well-loved Lucy Maud Montgomery haul with you all. So my great aunt is 94 years old and she has had to move into a nursing home recently, which part of that process meant that we had to go through her bookshelves because she only had a very small space available in her room, so she only could take her favorite books, which meant that we had to go through the rest of them and decide whether they were going to be donated or kept in her nursing home room or distributed out to friends and family. So, because I'm a big Lucy Maud Montgomery fan, I asked for some of her Montgomery books and I thought I would show off which ones I got. As you can see, they're very, very well loved. My aunt loved Anne of Green Gables, loved Montgomery's writing. It was always like her comfort read. If she wasn't feeling well, we'd find her in bed with Anne of Green Gables. So these are very well loved. Some of them are missing their covers. Some of the pages are a little loose, but I'm very excited because some of these are some of Montgomery's books that I've read before and love, and some of these will be new to me and I'm excited to dive into them. Lucy Maud Montgomery's writings are special in our family because it has been many generations of women in our family who have had Montgomery as one of their favorite authors. I have some writing from my great-grandmother's sister, and she described how their whole family used to love reading Montgomery especially, and that would have been when Anne of Green Gables was first being published. So I'm estimating that I'm the fifth generation of women in my family who have loved Montgomery, so I'm very excited to have these family treasure editions of Montgomery's work, even if they are not in the best condition. I do actually have a full set of Anne of Green Gables books that were a gift to me from my grandmother, but they're in storage right now in my hometown, so I don't have access to them right now, but I definitely would love to have all of Montgomery's books on my shelf one day because I do find her writing so magical. Especially, I love reading her writing in spring and in fall. I find she describes the seasons so beautifully that when you're in those transitional seasons, her writing just brings that to life. And of course, it makes you want to visit the Maritimes. I haven't been lucky enough to be out there yet, but one day I desperately want to do a road trip out to PEI, Nova Scotia, to see the places that I feel like I know so well from living in her universes growing up. So the first little set is from the Anne of Green Gables series. I've got Anne's House of Dreams, Rainbow Valley, and Rilla of Ingleside. So Anne's House of Dreams, it's a beautiful cover with her and Gilbert in front of their first home together. Obviously, we've got a couple of the pages loose. What's amazing is that even though some of the pages are loose, it looks like they're all there, so I'm not sure if any of you have tips for the best way to bind these back up. I don't know if I should just put a strip of packing tape along here to hold them together or what. But Anne's House of Dreams is one of my favorite books in the Anne series. I actually, when I was little, I read Anne of Green Gables probably a million times. It was one of my favorites growing up. I never really read the rest of the series. I think I got as far as Anne of Windy Poplars at one point, but I never made it further. I think because when I was younger, the books that kind of dealt with her more grown-up life just weren't as interesting to me as like a 10-year-old. So I just read Anne of Green Gables over and over again. But maybe 3 or 4 years ago, I decided I was going to read through the whole series, and when I got to Anne's House of Dreams, it's just one of the gems in the series that I think people miss out on if they only read Anne of Green Gables. So this book focuses on the first year or two of her marriage with Gilbert. It's just so sweet if you are someone who has read through the first few books and has just wanted to see them happy and in love. You get that in this book. It's got kind of, I think, all of Montgomery's best writing describing the little cottage they get by the seaside. We've got some new eccentric characters that befriend Anne, and there's some bittersweet moments and some joy-filled moments, and it's just a beautiful portrait of a young couple's first few years of marriage. So I'm very happy to have this book in my collection. Then Rainbow Valley is the second to last book in the series, and it is dealing with Anne's children. It really goes back to being more child-focused. It's a collection of vignettes about Anne's children's childhood. So it feels more like Anne of Green Gables than some of the later books in this series, in that it is, again, focusing primarily on the children, and Anne and Gilbert are more background characters as the parents. And then we have Rilla of Ingleside, which, after Anne of Green Gables, is probably my favorite book in this series. It's the last book in this series, and it focuses on Anne's daughter Rilla, named after Marilla, which is so sweet. And this book is set during World War I, which I don't think I need to say much more for you to realize that it's going to be a tearjerker. So, beautiful cover of Rilla with a young man in uniform behind her. This book is kind of unique in Canadian literature because it's the only book about the female home front perspective on World War I that was actually written in a contemporary time period. So this is, from a historical perspective, is a very important book in Canadian literature because it's giving a perspective that we don't really have in any other works of literature. We have books written about the home front later on, but this is the only one that was really written at the same time as the war was going on. It was published in 1921, so when it was published, the events, obviously World War I ended in 1918, so the events would have still been very fresh for everyone reading this book. It's just a beautiful story. If you haven't read it, I highly recommend going through the Anne series and getting to this one. It would probably stand alone, but I think it means more if you come to it through the whole Anne series, because you just really love all the characters so much by the time you get to this book, and you're just very invested in their story, and I think this is a beautiful way to sum up the series. It's interesting to think, obviously, when the first Anne book was published in the early 1900s, there's no way Montgomery could have known that this would have been how the series would have ended, that it would have ended with a war novel, but it's a really, really beautiful book. Rilla is about 15 in it, so she's just having her first sweet little romances. Her brothers and some of her school friends end up going off to war, and she is left at home with Anne and with the other women, trying to keep their life together through a really difficult time. So it's a very emotional story. It's a very beautiful way to end the series, and I'm very happy to have my own copy. It's actually in pretty good shape. Like, it has a front and back cover, which is pretty good for these books. There's a chunk in the middle here that is removable, but all the pages are intact, so there's nothing to stop me from rereading this one if I wanted to. The next three books are from the Emily of New Moon series, and I've actually never read Emily of New Moon, which is kind of surprising because I did love Anne so much. So I have Emily of New Moon, which is missing its front cover, Emily Climbs, the second book, which is also missing its front cover, and Emily's Quest, which has a front cover, but is actually split into two. But all the pages are here. So this is a trilogy. It again focuses, like Anne of Green Gables, it's focusing on an orphaned girl who wants to be a writer, who has a big imagination, and has to deal with the challenges of growing up. She moves in, I think, with an aunt and uncle, and apparently this just traces her through her childhood, young adult, teenage years, and I don't actually know much about it. It wasn't one that I read when I was younger. I was an Anne girl, so I didn't get to this one, but now that I have my own copies, maybe I will. Then I've got a couple standalone novels of hers. This one I'm very excited about. It's Along the Shore, and it's a collection of short stories of hers that focus on the ocean. So it looks like it has maybe a dozen stories or so that focus on the ocean. It says, in this collection of stories, Ellen Montgomery captures the haunting beauty and drama of living on Prince Edward Island surrounded by the sea. Ernest Hughes, a courageous young boy who, with his dog, is caught in changing tides. 12-year-old Mary Margaret, who must row through a snowstorm to keep the lighthouse light burning. Nora, who dreams of escaping New York and returning to her harbor home. And Lethal Lennox, who reconciles with her estranged fiancé during a storm at sea, are some of the heartwarming characters linked by the love of their sea, whom Ellen Montgomery readers will cherish. I've read one of Montgomery's short story collections before and really enjoyed it. Her short stories are very saccharine. They're very feel-good, cozy stories, and as someone who did grow up by the ocean, I think this book will be very sentimental for me. It's in really good condition, actually. It's probably in the best condition of all the books here. It's got a front and back cover, all the pages are in place. So I'm really looking forward. I think this would be a great read in the springtime, maybe early summer next year. I'm really looking forward to getting to this one. Next, I have Magic for Marigold, which is one of her standalone novels. This is one that I also haven't read yet. I've read The Blue Castle and Jane of Lantern Hill for her standalone novels. This one, as I understand it, is another one of her childhood-focused books, featuring, I guess, like a child protagonist called Marigold, who is, I think her father has passed away before she was born, and she's raised by her mother and her paternal relatives somewhere. And from my understanding, it's just something like Anne of Green Gables, just a little collection of linked stories about childhood adventures. So I think this will be another sweet read. The cover is adorable with the little girl holding a kitten in a garden. It looks like a classic Montgomery story of imagination and cozy home settings. So I'm looking forward to this one as well. And then I've got Mistress Pat, which is actually from a duology. The first one is Pat of Silverbush. So I'll have to read that one first before I get to this one. It's the second one in the series. But again, just a beautiful cover. Fall with a little farmhouse and our main character here. You can just tell from the covers of her books how much she brings nature and seasons into her stories. Like literally every cover of her books, it just embodies a season so well. This is such a beautiful fall cover. This one says, at 20, nearly everyone thought Pat ought to be having beaux, except, of course, Pat herself. For Patricia Gardner, Silverbush was both home and heaven. All she could ever ask of life was bound in the magic of the lovely old house on Prince Edward Island, and the people who shared it with her, especially her dear mother and father, her sister Cuddles, and the indefatigable Judy Plum. No, Pat could never bear the thought of abandoning Silverbush, nor her dream of one day running the house where good things never change. And now there is more than ever to do, what with planning for the Christmas family reunion, entertaining a countess, playing matchmaker to her poor Uncle Tom, and preparing for the arrival of the new hired man, Mr. Tillytruck. Yet, as those she had come to love so dearly began to move away, including Hilary Gordon, Pat began to question the wisdom of her choice of Silverbush over romance, and soon she would have to face the most troubling question of all: was it possible to be lonely at Silverbush? So my understanding is that Pat of Silverbush, the first book in the series, is really focused on her childhood. I think it follows her from like maybe 7 or 8 to when she's finished school around 18, and then this book carries on through her young adult years. So this one has a bit more of a mature focus. It sounds like a really sweet story. I might have to try to read the two of them still this year, because it mentions that this book has a Christmas family reunion as a focus, so if I have time this year, I might try to get to Pat of Silverbush this month, and then I can read Mistress Pat in December. It just sounds like another really sweet Montgomery story. I love the way she deals with location in her stories, the way she brings places to life in a way that I don't know if I've ever found another author who can do. You really feel like they're real places, and you can understand why the characters have such an emotional attachment to their homes, and this sounds like another one that has that exactly. It sounds like Silverbush is another place that it's going to come alive for me when I read it, so I'm looking forward to getting to Pat of Silverbush and Mistress Pat. So those are all the Montgomery books that I got. I have a few more that I also picked up from my aunt's collection. I have the first in the Mitford series, Jan Caron, At Home in Mitford, and Patches of Godlight, Father Tim's Favorite Quotes, which are also from the Mitford series. This one is apparently like a collection, as if it was written from one of the characters in the Mitford series, as if you've are reading his journal. So it's got all these different quotes, different handwriting, different ink, as if he's taped in pages in his journal. I think these are mostly focusing on religious quotes, and it sounds like it would be a nice companion piece to the series, which I'm hoping to read next year. And then, again, you can see this is a well-loved version. I'm assuming that this used to have some sort of nice decoration that she wanted to have on a post-it board or something, but this is the first book in the series. I don't know much about this series except that I remember my mom reading it when I was little and enjoying it, my aunt reading it, my grandma reading it, and I think it focuses on a small town and the cast of characters they're in, and just kind of goes through people's real life struggles, challenges, joys, sorrows, and describes, yeah, the people that are living in this town and what they're passing through. So it's like a really sweet and cozy series to read, and I'm looking forward to getting to it next year. I also got Anam Cara by John O'Donoghue, and this is one I've been wanting to read forever, so when I saw that it was in my great aunt's collection and it was one that she wasn't going to take with her to the nursing home, I definitely was like, yes, I'll take that one. It's a book of Celtic wisdom with a Christian slant, so it's kind of looking at Celtic Christianity. And as someone with Scottish roots, I find that very interesting. So I think this is just a series of short chapters dealing with different aspects of Celtic Christianity, Celtic spirituality, and I think it'll be a very interesting and enriching read, so I'm looking forward to that one as well. So this is the collection of books that I got from my great aunt when she had to downsize. As you saw, most of them are Montgomery with a few extras, and as a big Montgomery fan, I am happy to have some of these that I've read and loved added to my collection, and I'm very excited about the ones that will be new to me. There's nothing like diving into a new Montgomery book, so if you haven't checked out Lucy Maud Montgomery, or if you've only read her Anne series, I highly recommend branching out and trying some of her other stories. She's just a really, really wonderful author, and her stories have a magic in them that you can't find anywhere else. So until next time, enjoy wandering through the pages of a good book. Bye.